Hello, Francis. Yesterday, I think you said that all was God's will and not our own actions. And that's something I thought about a bit. And it leaves me thinking I really do get to sit back and enjoy the show. I don't really have to try. But is the trying, it starts to be like a lot of mirrors, is the trying also preordained? Does none of it have anything to do with me? That's what I wonder.
Well, in order to what we need is to eliminate any confusion. And the confusion arises out of what we mean by me or I. You see? Because either by I we mean a human being, the body-mind, the human body-mind. Or by I we mean universal consciousness. And there is a third possibility, which is that by I, we mean an individual consciousness, a separate, limited consciousness which is connected to and dependent on the human body-mind. So, out of these three possibilities, three possible meanings of the word, of the pronoun I, the last one is ignorance, because there is no such a separated, limited entity. Whereas it's okay to call I the body-mind if we know what we are doing, right? And it's okay to call I consciousness. So that would be I as consciousness would be the absolute, the real I, and I as body-mind would be, it would just mean the body-mind. So we would use there is still some danger here of confusion because we use the same pronoun to refer to two things, two different things. But the biggest confusion arises when I refers to an allegedly limited personal consciousness dependent upon this individual body-mind. Because such an I simply doesn't exist. It exists only as a belief, as a concept. But it doesn't have a real existence. So, coming back to, so because this separate I doesn't have a real existence, all its decisions or deeds, they are only alleged decisions or alleged deeds. But an illusory entity cannot make real decision or cannot take real actions, right? So in that sense, this limited I, or this limited consciousness, because it is an illusion, is devoid of freedom. There is no free will. For instance, a decision, look at the decision-making process. The decision appears after some deliberation or right away as a thought. I'm going to do this. Now, did we choose this thought? The question is, do we choose our thoughts? Or do they happen, do they arise in us just as the weather arises outside, appears outside, right? You see what I mean? So in fact, the thoughts are nothing else than cosmic events, just as the weather. Even if we assume if we make the common assumption that is often made in academia, which is kind of a religion, that's a religion of, according to which the brain creates thoughts. It's a religion because there is no evidence. But even if we assume that the thoughts that comes to us and the decisions are creations of the brain, now the brain is not an autonomous, isolated physical system. From the vantage point of science or physics, the brain is just a part of a huge universal machinery, if you will. So that if it is alleged that the brain creates the thoughts and therefore that the brain creates the decision, in fact, to be really true to this hypothesis, we have to come to the conclusion that it is not just the brain, but that it is the cosmos in its totality that creates the decision. Right? Since the brain is not an independent entity anymore, in other words, the brain alone doesn't make any decisions. In order to make decisions, the brain needs the heart, needs the nerves, needs the rest, and also needs the lungs, and the lungs needs the air which we breathe, and needs also to communicate through the sense organs with the surroundings. So the decision is not made by the single organ. That's a very simplistic view. The brain. The decision is a result of a universal cooperation, if you will. You see what I mean? I decide to go to the fridge and have a glass of beer. Well, why do I make this decision? Because I'm thirsty. But I'm thirsty because it's cold, because it's very warm, it's a summer day, so it's the season and the weather on that day that is as much at the origin of my going to the fridge as a conscious, free deliberation. You following me?
Yeah, I am.
So in fact, then in hindsight, after the thought came to me, let's have a glass of beer, the me as a separate person comes into the picture and claims to have been the decision maker. I say, well, I've just decided to have a beer. But in fact, not so. The thought came to me, the decision came to me just like the weather. And in this case, related to the weather.
So my decision to come here, for example, was part of a large interlocking...
Yes.
Not just my thought, that would be the most fun thing to do today.
Right, but even the thought itself is a cosmic event. It is a mistake to to believe that the thought is just generated somewhere in some thought production equipment that we have here. It would be true with this thought production equipment first. It would be true if a gross physical object could produce something subtle as a thought. That has never been proven. You know? We can show that there is a correlation between thoughts and sensations, between the subjective realm and electrochemical reactions in the brain and in the nervous system. That can be established, a correlation. But a correlation between A and B doesn't mean that A is the cause of B. Because it may well be that B is the cause of A. But it may equally well be that A and B are the effects of a common cause C. And this common cause of both A and B explains their correlation. You see? So, the hypothesis according to which matter causes thought, is the materialist hypothesis. The hypothesis according to which mind causes thought, if you will, and mind causes matter, perception, is the idealist hypothesis. But here, in Advaita, if there is only one reality, this single reality must be the cause of both thought and matter. So that's the third option, if you will, in which there is only one reality. And this single reality explains the correlation between mind and matter, if you will. So, I mean, I went on a tangent, but it's interesting to see that even in the materialist hypothesis, even in this hypothesis, even if it were true that brain, therefore matter, produces thought, therefore produces decisions, even in this case, because the brain is not an isolated system, and all the quantum fields, if you will, the various particles corresponding to the various particles the brain is made of, are not limited, localized in this small portion of space. Anything that happens in the brain is somehow, in fact, non-local.
So are you saying that because thoughts are part of this larger interlocking system that little me can't really control them, and I might as well give up?
No, well, that you see, okay, that we are moving into a different area here, but what I want first is to be clear about the fact that the local production of thoughts, whether by a local mind or by a local brain, is a nice hypothesis. But it's a very simplistic religion. Simplistic because it doesn't take into account the fact that the brain is not an isolated system, and religion because it is accepted without any serious evidence. So it's a simplistic religion. Now, the limited entity that allegedly creates the thoughts, therefore, is not the real creator of the thoughts, since these thoughts are cosmic events. So we have to come to the conclusion whether we are in the materialist perspective or whether we are in the non-dualist perspective. In both cases, we have to come to the conclusion that the thoughts are cosmic events. They are generated by a reality which is bigger than the separate individual we believe to be. And that there are cosmic events like the rain, or the snow, or a hurricane. Now, and therefore, that the limited entity that claims authorship of the thought, and therefore that claims to be the one who has made the decision, is an imposter? Is an imposter. Because it claims the authorship of something it has not created. It comes after the fact. It wasn't present when the decision was being made. The decision just came, freshly baked out of God's oven, right, with the perfume of butter and whatever, and vanilla. But then the little boy comes and says, "Oh, I baked." So I'm trying to move to what you were saying then. What was it?
Well, given what you've just said, is there any way of stopping or controlling thoughts?
Yeah. Having understood that every deed, every decision, every thought, but if we say every thought, it implies every decision by a separate entity, and if every decision by a separate entity is an illusion, every thought by a separate entity is an illusion, therefore any decision of this separate entity is an illusion, and therefore any action, any endeavor of this separate entity is equally an illusion, because this separate entity is in fact an illusion itself. So this separate entity cannot do anything, right? That's the bad news. But the situation is not as desperate as it seems to be. That's the bad news. The good news is that we are not a separate entity, since a separate entity has never had real existence in the first place. We, however, have real existence. We are real. The consciousness hearing these words is real. And therefore, this consciousness hearing these words has real freedom. And is the one making the decision. But we have to understand then that this consciousness making the decision is also the same consciousness, or reality, if you prefer, because consciousness at that moment, that makes it rain or makes it snow. You see? So, in other words, the moment we take responsibility for our own decisions and thoughts, which is fair, we have also to take responsibility for whatever else happens in the world, in the universe, which is beautiful. You see? Then we are in line with the cosmos, if you will. We are in line with the Tao. That's what it means. You know, we are both in our freedom because our decisions are universal decisions, provided they take into account the fact that they are universal, and the implications of the universal origin of those decisions. Which means we cannot claim that this event in the world is bad or good, because the only thing we can claim is that it is our event, that it is the exercise of our freedom outside, of our dominion outside, such just as this thought, this decision we claim to be the author inside, is the exercise of our freedom inside. You see? But we cannot speak from both sides of our mouth, saying on the one hand that this decision here we take is our decision, but that the rain that happens to be today in Shropshire, like every other day, is not our decision.
Just one more question then. What about desire for truth and intention and commitment? How does that integrate? I don't.
The true desire for truth, and by which I mean not the desire for a separate individual to feel better, but the true desire for truth always comes directly from God's oven. Always. So that's something we have to think about it once, reach this conclusion, understand what I mean, and then every time we feel the desire for truth in us, there is no need to come back to it. We acknowledge, okay, that's God who is speaking now, right? That it comes from my true nature. So we welcome it as such. We allow for it to do its job.
Well, this is all really big. A big chunk just fell into place for me. Thank you very much.
Yes, the desire for the truth